Picture this. A 16-year-old kid walks into a bank, cashes a fake check for thousands of dollars, then strolls out like he owns the place. Sounds like something straight out of Hollywood, right? Well, believe it or not, this actually happened. The teenager was Frank Abagnale Jr., and his incredible story of deception became one of Steven Spielberg's most beloved films, Catch Me If You Can. But here's the million-dollar question that's been haunting fans since 2002. How much of Leonardo DiCaprio's charming con artist actually reflects the real Frank Abagnale Jr.? Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world where Hollywood magic meets real-life crime to separate fact from fiction in one of cinema's greatest true crime stories. Catch Me If You Can tells the story of Frank Abagnale Jr., who ran away from home at 16 and embarked on an extraordinary crime spree that lasted nearly 5 years. During this time, he successfully impersonated an airline pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, and even a college professor, all while cashing millions of dollars in fraudulent checks across 26 countries. The 2002 film starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Frank and Tom Hanks as FBI agent Carl Hanratty was based on Abagnale's 1980 autobiography, written with Stan Redding. But here's where things get interesting. Frank Abagnale himself has admitted that Spielberg's adaptation is only about 80% accurate to his claims, and even those claims have been questioned by investigators and journalists over the years. So let's embark on this journey of discovery, examining each major element of the film to see where Hollywood stayed true to life and where creative license took over. In Spielberg's film, we see Frank's father portrayed as a charming, smooth talker played by Christopher Walken. Frank Sr. is shown as someone who bends the rules, tells white lies to get ahead, and essentially serves as Frank Jr.'s inspiration for his life of deception. The famous two mice and cream story that his father tells becomes a recurring theme throughout the movie, representing Frank's determination to never give up. The film also depicts Frank's parents' divorce as the primary catalyst for his criminal behavior. We see young Frank devastated by his family falling apart, particularly when his mother remarries and has another child, seemingly replacing him. This emotional trauma is presented as the driving force behind his decision to run away and start his life of crime. The truth about Frank's family life is quite different from what we see on screen. Frank Abagnale Sr. was actually an honest, hard-working man who did not approve of his son's early criminal behavior. When teenage Frank began shoplifting and engaging in small-scale scams, his father actively tried to discourage these activities. There's no evidence that Frank Sr. was the kind of charming rule-bender portrayed in the film. The relationship between father and son in the movie is one of the most significant departures from reality. While the film shows Frank maintaining contact with his father throughout his crime spree, even visiting him while impersonating a pilot and later a doctor, the truth is far more heartbreaking. After Frank ran away from home, he never saw his father again. There were no touching reunions, no secret meetings, and no paternal support for his criminal activities. The divorce did indeed affect Frank deeply, but the details were different. His mother did not remarry and have another child, as shown in the film. Also, Frank wasn't an only child, as the movie suggests. Perhaps most importantly, Frank actually lived with his single father for a considerable time after the divorce, before eventually running away. When Frank got into trouble as a teenager involving his father's credit cards, Frank Sr. tried to enroll him in a school for wayward boys. This attempt at getting his son back on the right track doesn't appear in the film at all. Interestingly, Frank Abagnale Jr. himself was pleased with Spielberg's decision to portray his father in a positive light, even though it wasn't entirely accurate. He felt it served the story better and honored his father's memory, even if it wasn't the complete truth. Tom Hanks's Carl Hanratty is one of the most memorable characters in the film. He's portrayed as a dedicated, somewhat obsessive FBI agent who becomes personally invested in catching Frank. The character is shown as being initially frustrated by Frank's ability to stay one step ahead, but gradually developing a grudging respect and even a father-figure relationship with the young criminal. The movie depicts Hanratty as working largely alone, driven by personal determination to catch Frank. Their cat-and-mouse game becomes increasingly personal. with Frank even calling Hanratty on Christmas Eve, leading to some of the film's most touching moments. The character of Carl Hanratty is actually a composite of several FBI agents, but is primarily based on Special Agent Joseph Shea. Agent Shea was indeed the head of the FBI investigative team pursuing Frank, and had spent several years tracking him down. The real relationship between Frank and Agent Shea was remarkably similar to what we see in the film. Like Hanratty, Shea initially believed he was chasing an experienced criminal in his mid-30s, not realizing his suspect was just a teenager. This misconception lasted for years and contributed to Frank's ability to evade capture for so long. Perhaps most remarkably, the bond that developed between them was real. Frank Abagnale has confirmed that he and Joseph Shea remained in contact over the years after Frank's capture and transformation. Shea watched Frank turn his life around and even got to see Frank's children grow up. This ongoing relationship mirrors the touching ending of the film where we see Frank working with the FBI. The main difference is that Shea wasn't working alone as Hanratty appears to be in the movie. He was part of a larger investigative team, though he was indeed the primary agent assigned to the case and Frank's main point of contact with the Bureau. Pan Am pilot. The movie shows Frank successfully impersonating a Pan Am pilot, deadheading on flights around the world and staying in luxury hotels. This portion of the story is largely accurate. Frank did indeed pose as a pilot, and his method was surprisingly simple. He called Pan Am's corporate headquarters, claimed to be a pilot who had lost his uniform, and asked where he could get a replacement. They directed him to a uniform company, where he simply walked in and ordered a pilot's uniform. Frank's knowledge of aviation terminology and procedures came from spending time around airports and talking to real pilots. He was careful never to actually fly a plane, instead using his fake credentials to catch free rides and jump seats, a common practice for airline employees. The Doctor. The film depicts Frank working as a pediatrician in a Georgia hospital, where he meets and falls in love with Brenda, played by Amy Adams. This part of the story is also largely true, though with some important differences. Frank did indeed work as a doctor, and he was terrified by this role because he knew he could potentially harm patients. The movie accurately shows his fear and the close calls he experienced. The famous Blue Baby incident, where Frank didn't understand the medical terminology and nearly caused a crisis, actually happened. However, Frank's confession to Brenda occurred differently than shown in the film. Rather than the dramatic last-minute revelation as he's escaping through a window, Frank chose to come clean because he knew the FBI was closing in and he hoped to start a legitimate life with her. His plan backfired when she attempted to turn him in. The Lawyer. Frank's brief career as a lawyer is touched upon in the film, though not explored in great detail. In reality, Frank did work for a law firm and even passed the Louisiana bar exam on his third attempt. This demonstrates his remarkable intelligence and ability to absorb complex information quickly. The Missing Career College Professor. One of Frank's impersonations that didn't make it into the film was his role as a college professor. According to Frank's account, he worked as a sociology professor at Brigham Young University. He managed this by staying just one chapter ahead of his students in the textbook, though some students found his teaching methods unusual. However, this claim has been disputed. In 2003, BYU staff stated they could find no record of Frank's employment at the university. Frank claimed he couldn't remember which alias he used during his time there, making verification impossible. It's possible he worked as a teaching assistant rather than a full professor, which might explain the lack of records. The movie portrays Frank as quite the ladies' man, with numerous romantic encounters throughout his crime spree. His relationship with Brenda Strong, the candy striper who becomes his fiancée, serves as the emotional heart of the latter part of the film. Their romance is shown as Frank's potential path to redemption and a normal life. Frank's romantic life was indeed a significant part of his story, and his taste for female attention was both a motivator and ultimately part of his downfall. The relationship with Brenda was real and followed the general pattern shown in the film, though with the confession occurring differently as mentioned earlier. The movie suggests that Frank's capture in France was due to detective work by Agent Hanratty, but in reality, it was a romantic encounter that led to his arrest. A flight attendant with whom Frank had previously had an affair spotted him in France and reported him to authorities. This detail was changed for the film to give Hanratty's character the satisfaction of outsmarting Frank through pure detective work. One of the most thrilling and memorable scenes in the film shows Frank escaping from an airplane while being transported back to the United States. In the movie, Frank asks to use the restroom, then somehow manages to remove the toilet and escape through the aircraft's plumbing system, leaving only a few screws behind for the bewildered Agent Hanratty to discover. This scene is pure Hollywood fiction, and aviation experts have explained why it's impossible. According to Skip Jones of the Aerospace Industries Association, aircraft toilet systems are completely sealed from the rest of the plane. No matter what happens in there, you can't get into the rest of the airplane, he explains. Payload Systems engineer Alan Anderson points out additional problems with this scenario. The toilets are mounted on tanks weighing over 100 pounds, and even if someone could somehow remove the toilet, they would then have to crawl through a pipe only 4 inches in diameter. A person would have to be pretty small, and it would be messy, Anderson notes diplomatically. So how did Frank actually escape? The truth is less glamorous but more believable. Frank escaped through the aircraft's kitchen gallery, where food is loaded and unloaded. Having spent considerable time around airplanes during his pilot impersonation, Frank would have known the layout of commercial aircraft well enough to know that the toilet escape was impossible, but the galley provided a viable exit route. This detail was changed by Stan Redding, the co-author of Frank's autobiography, who apparently felt the toilet escape made for a better story. Frank himself has confirmed that the real escape was through the kitchen area. The film accurately depicts Frank's eventual capture in France and his imprisonment there under harsh conditions. Frank did indeed serve time in a French prison, and the conditions were as brutal as shown in the movie. He was eventually extradited to the United States, where he served additional time in federal prison. The movie also correctly shows Frank's second escape attempt in 1971, when he tried to flee to Brazil. He was recaptured and remained in prison until 1974, when he made his famous deal with the FBI. The film ends on an uplifting note, showing Frank successfully working with the FBI to catch other check forgers and fraudsters. This transformation from criminal to crime fighter is presented as a natural evolution of Frank's talents being put to good use. This aspect of the story is largely accurate. In 1974, Frank did indeed broker a deal with the FBI, agreeing to help them understand and prevent fraud in exchange for his freedom. He became a consultant, using his insider knowledge of criminal techniques to help protect businesses and individuals from the kinds of scams he had once perpetrated. Frank's work with the FBI was successful and led to his legitimate career as a security consultant. He has spent decades helping organizations protect themselves from fraud, speaking at conferences, and advising on security measures. This transformation from one of America's most wanted criminals to a respected security expert is perhaps the most remarkable part of his entire story. In recent years, Frank Abagnale has been more candid about the accuracy of his own story. In a 2015 interview, he admitted that Spielberg's film is about 80% accurate compared to his claims in the book. This suggests that even Frank acknowledges some embellishment in his original account. Several journalists and investigators have attempted to verify Frank's claims over the years, with mixed results. Some aspects of his story check out completely, while others remain unverified or have been contradicted by available records. The challenge in fact-checking Frank's story is that many of the institutions and people involved no longer exist or have incomplete records from the 1960s and early 1970s. Additionally, Frank used multiple aliases throughout his crime spree, making it difficult to trace his activities definitively. Whether every detail of Frank's story is completely accurate doesn't diminish the core truth. A teenager did successfully impersonate multiple professionals, evade the FBI for years, and ultimately transform his life to help prevent the very crimes he once committed. The specific details may vary, but the essence of the story remains extraordinary. Despite not being consulted during the film's production, Frank Abagnale does make a cameo appearance in the movie. He plays a French policeman who arrests Leonardo DiCaprio's character in one of the final scenes. Frank has mentioned that he was reluctant to appear in the film but was convinced by the producers. "I really didn't want to, but they insisted I do so," Frank explained. They cut all my hair off, and they put me in a cap and a big coat, and put me in a night scene playing a French policeman who goes up to arrest Leo in one of the final scenes of the movie. This small touch adds an authentic element to the film, allowing the real Frank to literally capture his fictional counterpart. When asked why he embarked on his life of crime, Frank has provided insight that helps explain his motivations. It begins with my parents' divorce and its dramatic effect on me. I ran away and suddenly found myself a teenager alone in the world. I had to grow up very quickly and become very creative in order to survive. But what started out as survival became more and more of a game. I was an opportunist, so when I saw an opening, I asked myself, could I get away with that? Then there was the satisfaction of actually getting away with it. The more I got away with, the more of a game it became. A game I knew I would ultimately lose, but a game I was going to have fun playing until I did. One of the most powerful moments in the film comes near the end when Agent Hanratty confronts Frank at an airport. Sometimes it's easier living the lie, Hanratty tells him, recognizing that Frank's attachment to his fake identities comes from a deep psychological need. When Hanratty points out that nobody's chasing you anymore, it highlights that Frank's compulsion to deceive has become self-perpetuating, driven by internal rather than external forces. This scene captures something profound about the nature of deception and identity that transcends the specifics of Frank's criminal activities. Catch Me If You Can has become more than just a movie. It's become a cultural touchstone for discussions about deception, identity, and redemption. The film's blend of entertainment and moral complexity has made it a favorite for audiences and critics alike. Today, Frank Abagnale continues his work as a security consultant, having spent more than 4 decades helping organizations protect themselves from fraud. His company, Abagnale and Associates, provides fraud prevention services to businesses around the world. Frank regularly speaks at conferences and events, sharing his insights on security and fraud prevention. His transformation from criminal to crime fighter remains one of the most compelling redemption stories in modern criminal history. The story of Frank Abagnale Jr. offers several important lessons. First, it demonstrates the power of intelligence and charisma, showing how these qualities can be used for both destructive and constructive purposes. Second, it illustrates the possibility of redemption and the value of second chances. Finally, it highlights the importance of robust security measures and the ongoing need to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated fraud techniques. So how accurate is Catch Me If You Can? The answer is complex. The broad strokes of Frank's story are true. A teenager did run away from home, successfully impersonate multiple professionals, evade capture for years, and ultimately help the FBI catch other criminals. The emotional core of the story, a young man's journey from desperation to redemption, rings true. However, many of the specific details have been embellished, changed, or simplified for dramatic effect. Frank's relationship with his father, the exact circumstances of his capture, the method of his airplane escape, and various romantic details have all been altered to serve the story. Perhaps Steven Spielberg captured the essence of this dilemma in the film itself. The story works because it contains a deeper truth about human nature, redemption, and the complex relationship between law enforcement and criminals. Whether Frank Abagnale Jr. escaped through an airplane toilet or a kitchen galley matters less than the fact that he was resourceful enough to escape at all. The real Frank Abagnale Jr. has lived long enough to see his story become legend, and he seems comfortable with the embellishments. After all, for someone who spent years crafting false identities, the line between truth and fiction was always somewhat blurred. What's not in dispute is that Frank Abagnale Jr. successfully transformed his life from notorious criminal to respected consultant, helping prevent the very crimes he once committed. In the end, that transformation may be the most remarkable part of his entire extraordinary story. The film Catch Me If You Can succeeds not because it's a perfect documentary of Frank's life, but because it captures the spirit of his journey and the timeless themes of deception, pursuit, and ultimately, redemption. Sometimes, as Agent Hanratty might say, the truth is more important than the facts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real story behind Catch Me If You Can, make sure to like and subscribe for more movie versus reality content. What other based on a true story films would you like to see analyzed? Let me know in the comments below.